They say nothing real ever happens overnight. That life moves slowly, change creeps in silently, and nothing that transforms you comes in a single, blinding flash. But what if that was a lie? What if everything could change in just 1 week? Elias Moreno never expected anything to happen to him. Not anything good, at least. He was 17, lived in a rusted-out trailer on the edge of Columbus, Ohio, and worked part-time cleaning a mechanic shop just to keep the lights on. His mother, Rosa, battled a constant string of double shifts and exhaustion, while his father was a memory he stopped asking about years ago. He had accepted, quietly, painfully, that survival was the only thing he was allowed to hope for. Until the letter came. It was the kind of day you forget before it ends. Sky gray, rain soft and lazy, his backpack soaked at the corners. Elias was walking home from school, counting quarters in his pocket to see if he had enough for bus fare the next morning, when he found a pale yellow envelope wedged between the screen door and the frame. No return address. No stamp. Just his full name. Elias Emmanuel Moreno. He stared at it for a long time, heart ticking like a metronome gone off-beat. The paper was thick, expensive, heavier than what anyone in his life had ever used. He held it like it might burn. Inside, a single typed sheet. Mr. Moreno. You are the named beneficiary of an inheritance that must be claimed in person. Further details will be disclosed upon verification of identity. Please report to the following address on Monday at noon. J.D. Caldwell, Attorney at Law. There was a phone number. No explanation. No hint of who or why. Elias read it 3 times before the words stopped making sense. He handed it to his mother that night across their chipped kitchen table. Her hands trembled slightly when she saw the paper. Who would leave you something? She asked, trying to hide the disbelief in her voice. I don't know, he whispered. You think it's real? She didn't answer. And maybe that said everything. The days that followed moved strangely. Time felt heavier, slower. The air around him seemed to watch him more closely, as if something was waiting. He didn't tell anyone at school. What could he say? That a poor kid with holes in his shoes might suddenly be someone worth noticing? Even if it was a prank, even if it was some mistake, something inside Elias refused to throw the letter away. He kept it folded in his pocket, like a secret he could touch when the world got too sharp. When Monday came, he didn't go to school. He borrowed his mother's one good dress shirt, the collar too big, sleeves rolled up, and caught the early bus downtown. The address led him to an old building made of sandstone and stories, the kind of place with marble floors and cold echoes. He nearly turned around twice before pushing the door open. The woman at the front desk looked up. You must be Mr. Moreno. That stopped him. How did she know? Yeah. She handed him a clipboard. He's waiting for you in conference room B. Elias moved down the hallway with a heartbeat that sounded like thunder. His palms were damp. His mouth dry. Part of him still believed this would end in humiliation. But the man who sat at the head of the table looked up and smiled kindly. Elias. I'm Joseph Caldwell. Please, sit. His voice was warm. Familiar, somehow. I don't want to waste your time, Caldwell said, opening a leather folder. I represent the estate of a man named Thomas Whitaker. Do you know him? Elias shook his head. He passed away 3 weeks ago. No known family. But in his will, he left everything to a minor. You. Elias blinked. But I've never met him. Caldwell nodded. Sometimes, the people who leave the biggest marks on our lives are the ones we never knew were watching. Elias's breath caught in his throat. Caldwell slid a file toward him. Inside, a deed. A bank account summary. A set of keys. This will change your life, Caldwell said. But only if you're ready for what comes with it. And just like that, the world as Elias knew it, cracked. Not with noise. Not with chaos. But with a quiet invitation. To step into a life he never imagined was meant for him. Elias didn't remember walking out of the building. He didn't remember crossing the street or waiting for the bus. The world moved around him, car horns, footsteps, chatter, but it all sounded distant, like someone had turned the volume down on reality. He sat on the back of the bus gripping the folder like it might vanish. Inside were documents with numbers he couldn't process. A deed to a house in a neighborhood he'd only passed on the way to the hospital once. A savings account with more money than he'd ever seen, even on TV. And a name, Thomas Whitaker, that still meant nothing to him. By the time he stepped off the bus and walked back through the familiar dirt trail behind his trailer, the folder was slightly bent, damp from his hands. His mother stood on the porch, eyes wide, her arms crossed tight against her chest. "Well?" she asked. He didn't speak. He handed her the folder. She opened it slowly. Her mouth parted. Then shut again. Her eyes didn't move for a long time. "Who is this man?" she whispered. Elias shook his head. "I don't know." She looked at him, really looked, and in that moment, something shifted. Not joy. Not relief. Something closer to fear disguised as awe. "You have to be careful," she said. "I didn't ask for it," he replied. "I know," she said. "That's why it's dangerous." That night, the trailer was too quiet. Neither of them knew how to talk about it. The future suddenly had too many doors, and behind each one was something they didn't understand. By morning, Elias made his choice. He asked his mother to take a day off work, just one, and together they took the bus to the address listed on the deed. The house was nothing like he expected. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even that big. But it was solid. Set back on a tree-lined street where the sidewalks were clean and the air smelled like safety. The kind of place where wind chimes didn't sound like warnings. They stood in front of the gate for a long time. Then he pulled the keys from his pocket and pushed it open. The house creaked when they stepped in. Not haunted, just old. It smelled like wood polish and memories. Like someone had cared for it until the very end. Everything inside was still there. A worn couch. A record player. Bookshelves packed with hard covers. A coffee mug beside an armchair, as if Thomas Whitaker might walk in at any moment and pick up right where he left off. Rosa didn't move past the front hallway. Her arms stayed folded, her eyes darting from object to object like they might accuse her of trespassing. Elias walked deeper into the house. Each room whispered questions. Who was this man? Why him? In the bedroom, he found a box on the dresser. It wasn't locked. Inside, photos. Dozens of them. Some recent. Some yellowed and curling. Elias sat on the edge of the bed and flipped through them with shaking hands. There was one, a boy standing in front of a community center. Tattered sneakers. Skinny arms. Hair buzzed short. It was him. The picture was dated from almost a decade ago. He stared at it, breath frozen. He didn't remember it being taken. He didn't remember seeing that man. But on the back of the photo, in faded pen, were 2 words. He sees. His skin prickled. He called out for his mother. She came in quietly, saw the photo in his hand, and froze. "Mom," he asked, voice small. "Did you know him?" Her silence said more than a yes ever could. "I saw him once," she said eventually. "At the shelter, when you were 8. You'd fallen asleep during the meal. He asked your name. I thought he was just being kind." Elias looked back at the photo. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I didn't know what it meant." They sat there, the space between them full of truths too heavy to carry yet. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay on the unfamiliar bed, listening to the stillness of a house that wasn't quite his, full of shadows that weren't quite strangers. And then, just past midnight, he saw it. A slip of paper taped behind the bedroom door. It was almost invisible, hidden by years of paint and dust. He peeled it off slowly. On it was a short, handwritten note. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And that means you're ready. You won't find answers in the bank account. You'll find them in the blue box under the floorboards. Trust your instincts. That's what I saw in you. T. Elias stared at the words until they blurred. Then he got on his knees and pressed his ear to the wooden floor. And in the silence, in the stillness of that unfamiliar life, he heard it. A hollow echo beneath the boards. And the beginning of something he didn't have a name for yet. The floorboards were older than the house looked from the outside. Elias ran his fingers along each groove, listening for that faint hollowness again. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but once you heard it, you couldn't unhear it. A single board near the closet gave a dull, muted sound when tapped. He got a screwdriver from the kitchen. No hesitation. Just instinct. It wasn't just a hiding place. It was intentional. The nails had been set loosely, like someone had planned for this moment to happen eventually. He pried the board up and reached in. His fingers brushed against cold metal. The blue box was small, battered, and heavy for its size. It looked like it had traveled, like it had been waiting. Elias set it on the bed and stared at it, his hands trembling slightly. He had no idea what to expect, but every part of him knew that whatever was inside would shift something fundamental. He opened it. Inside were three things: a bundle of letters tied together with twine, a thick envelope, and a worn leather wallet. He picked up the wallet first. It was old. The leather cracked. Inside, an ID, Thomas Whitaker, with an address that matched the house. Tucked behind it was a faded photo, a younger man holding a baby. The man was unmistakably Thomas. The baby. Elias couldn't tell. He turned to the envelope. It was labeled, "For Elias, when the world starts asking questions." Inside were papers. Legal ones. He recognized a birth certificate. A hospital discharge form. And then, something that made his throat close. An adoption application. Incomplete. Unsigned. But with names on it. The child, Elias Emmanuel Moreno. The prospective guardian, Thomas Whitaker. He felt the air leave the room. Elias sat back on the mattress, the box still open beside him. The pieces didn't quite connect yet, not fully, but they were there, floating just out of reach. He untied the bundle of letters next. The handwriting was strong but imperfect, like someone who didn't write often. Each letter began the same way. "Elias, I know I don't have the right to call myself anything to you. But maybe someday, you'll want to know why I watched from a distance." Letter after letter told fragments. About a man who had once loved a woman he couldn't keep. About mistakes made. About a promise, not to interfere, but to make sure that Elias never slipped so far into the cracks that he couldn't climb back out. One line repeated more than once. "Your mother didn't want me in your life. But I never stopped being nearby." Elias blinked back the burn in his eyes. Was that the truth? Was that the whole story? He didn't sleep. The next morning, he sat across from his mother at the kitchen table in the house they still didn't quite believe was theirs. He placed the letters between them without speaking. She looked at them, then at him. "I didn't lie," she said softly. "I just didn't explain." Who was he? She folded her hands tightly in her lap. "He was your father." The words landed heavy. "I thought he left," Elias said, barely above a whisper. "He did. But not the way you think." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "He wasn't good for me. I couldn't trust him. And when I got pregnant, I told him I didn't want help. I didn't want him showing up and then disappearing again. I needed stability. But he watched us," Elias said. "He left money. A house. All of this." She nodded. "He never stopped asking about you. He sent letters. I sent most of them back." "Why?" "Because I didn't want you to grow up needing a man who wasn't there," she said. "But he never stopped trying." Quietly. Respectfully. "He respected the boundary, but he never stopped loving you. I think. He always hoped someday you'd know." Elias looked down at the table. The anger didn't come the way he thought it would. Instead, there was grief. Slow, confusing grief for a relationship he never had, and for the space it left behind. "Why now?" he asked. "Why leave me everything?" Because he didn't have anyone else. And maybe he thought, if he couldn't be there in life, he could leave you something in death. Elias went outside after that. The sky was still, the wind barely moving the trees. The neighborhood was too quiet for a 17-year-old boy carrying that kind of weight. He sat on the front steps and stared at the street. He didn't know what came next. What he was supposed to do with all of this. The money, the house, the truth. None of it changed the fact that he was still Elias, still unsure, still scared. But he felt something else now, too. Not just loss. Possibility. Later that day, he found himself back at the floorboards, sitting beside the open space where the box had been. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was standing at the edge of someone else's story. He felt like maybe this was the first page of his own. The following days moved like water through cupped hands, steady, slippery, impossible to hold on to. Elias stayed in the house. Not because he was afraid, but because the walls felt like they were breathing. Every corner of the space held echoes he hadn't yet learned to translate. He found more traces of Thomas, margin notes in old books, a scratchy voice on a forgotten voicemail, receipts tucked into cookbooks with dates that aligned with things Elias vaguely remembered, a winter coat that had arrived at just the right time, a sudden scholarship donation to his school cafeteria fund. These weren't coincidences. They were breadcrumbs. He wasn't angry at his mother. Not anymore. The story she gave him was hers to carry, and now it was his too. But something inside him had shifted. As if he had walked into a room that had always been locked, and found it filled with light and dust, and a name he had never learned to say without flinching. Father. But the real world, of course, didn't pause to let him catch up. People started asking questions. First, the neighbors. Then, a former classmate who spotted him getting off a bus uptown. "You live there now?" she asked, as if he'd committed a crime. Then came the message requests on social media. People he hadn't spoken to in years, suddenly curious. Suddenly friendly. Some just nosy. Others worse. His old boss at the mechanic shop left him a voicemail that started polite and turned bitter in under 60 seconds. "Thought you were one of the good ones, kid. Guess money changes people faster than grease washes off." But it hadn't changed him. At least, he didn't want it to. That was the part no one understood. He didn't feel rich. He didn't feel powerful. He felt like a stranger trying to wear someone else's name. Someone else's legacy. It all came to a head on Thursday. Caldwell, the lawyer, called him back into the office. "You've got choices," he said, folding his hands on the desk. Elias sat up. "What kind of choices?" Most kids your age, when they inherit something this significant, they go one of two ways. Some sell it all, disappear, try to forget the weight. Others, they lean into it, try to make meaning out of it. "I don't know which one I'm supposed to be," Elias admitted. "You're not supposed to be anything," Caldwell said. "But the house, the money, that's not the end of the story. It's the beginning of whatever you write next." Elias stared at the edge of the desk. "What if I don't know how to write anything?" "Then start with something small," Caldwell said. "Use the money. Help someone. Fix something broken." That's what Thomas always tried to do. Quietly. The words stuck with him. That night, Elias sat in the kitchen, watching the steam from a mug of tea he didn't even like. His mother was asleep in the guest room down the hall. He stared at the walls, at the calmness, at the quiet responsibility that now hung over him like oxygen. He pulled out a notebook, one he'd found in Thomas's desk, and made a list. Not of things he wanted to buy, but of things he wanted to change. He wrote the name of his old high school at the top. He thought of the cafeteria worker who always gave him extra fries when he had nothing to eat. He thought of the kid in his sophomore English class who got bullied and never came back after winter break. He thought of his mother's tired feet, her unread books, the way she always made coffee too early in the morning because sleep never really stayed with her. And then he wrote something he hadn't expected to write. Fix the gym roof at the community center. He didn't even remember that memory until the pen hit the paper, but suddenly, it returned. The year he was 9. The week the roof leaked. The way the volunteers tried to keep the kids safe while rain dripped onto the tile floors. And the man, tall, quiet, unfamiliar, who had handed out plastic ponchos and laughed with the kids like he wasn't afraid to be invisible. It had been Thomas. It had always been him. Elias closed the notebook. And something in him, something quiet but steady, clicked into place. He wasn't here to replace Thomas. He was here to continue him. Not in name. Not in legacy. In action. The next morning, Elias took the bus to the community center. He asked to speak to the director. A woman in her 50s with a sharp gaze and a kind heart. Her name was Ms. Turner. "I'd like to make a donation," he said, voice steady, heart loud. She raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "The roof," he said. "And maybe some books. And maybe whatever else needs fixing." She studied him. "You Thomas's boy?" He nodded slowly. "I always thought he was waiting for the right time to bring you in. Maybe this is the time." She smiled, not wide, but real. "Then let's get to work." The donation changed things. Not just for the community center, but for Elias. The director, Ms. Turner, introduced him to the staff as a young man who knows the value of giving back, and every time someone shook his hand, he felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. Not because he didn't mean it, but because he still didn't feel like it was his to give. He kept going back. Not to be thanked, but to understand. He started stacking books in the center's learning room. Helped paint the old basketball lines on the worn court out back. Every corner held pieces of Thomas. Not in photos or plaques, but in the way people spoke of a man who always showed up when you didn't expect him. And yet, no one really knew him. Not deeply. Not past the surface of small kindnesses and silent generosity. It bothered Elias more than he admitted. Who was his father really? Why did he stay in the background? Why, after years of being gone, did he leave everything? On a Thursday afternoon, as Elias helped unload donated chairs from a van, Ms. Turner waved him over. "There's someone asking for you." Elias wiped sweat from his forehead. "Me." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "Says she knew your father. Insisted on speaking to you directly." He followed her around the side of the building. There, standing under the shade of an old oak tree, was a woman Elias had never seen before. She was in her late 50s, tall, her salt and pepper hair pulled into a low bun. Her clothes were simple but elegant, and her presence carried a quiet authority, the kind that made you stand straighter without knowing why. "You're Elias," she said. He nodded, unsure. "Yeah." She looked at him like she was seeing something more than just his face. "I'm Evelyn," she said. "Thomas's sister." Elias blinked. His sister? I didn't know he had any family left. Her smile was faint. Most people didn't. We were estranged for years. He didn't know what to say. Something inside him tightened. "Why now?" he asked. "Because he's gone," she said simply. "And I think he'd want you to know some things. Things he never said." Elias glanced toward the center, toward the life he was just starting to build. "I'm not sure I want to hear it." "Maybe not," she said. "But that doesn't mean you don't need to." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." They sat on a bench near the garden, just far enough from earshot. "I'm not here to claim anything," she began. "The will was clear. He chose you. I accept that. But Thomas wasn't always the man people knew at the end." Elias said nothing. He was brilliant. Stubborn. and deeply alone. He had a way of pushing people away before they could leave him. I was the last to try to stay. And even I failed. Why did he leave? Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did he never come back? Evelyn's eyes softened. He didn't know how to fix what he'd broken. And he didn't believe he deserved the chance. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. This was his. I found it after the funeral. I wasn't sure if I should bring it. But after hearing what you've done with the house, the center, I figured, maybe it's time. Elias took the notebook. It was leather-bound, heavy with use. He opened the first page. The handwriting was familiar. Messy, slanted, like someone who thought faster than they could write. If I die before I say these things, I want them written somewhere. I want him to know I saw him. That I was there, even when I wasn't supposed to be. Each page bled with regret. With questions never asked. With memories Elias didn't know they shared, a scraped knee outside the shelter, a missed soccer tryout, the time he broke a window trying to get a football back. Thomas had been there. In the background. Always watching. I thought he didn't care, Elias murmured. He cared too much, Evelyn said. But guilt is loud. And he let it run his life. They sat in silence, the weight of lost time sitting between them. Elias looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because I know what it's like to grow up with ghosts, she said. And I don't want you to carry one that isn't yours. That night, Elias read the entire notebook. Some entries were just single lines. He likes drawing. Just like I did. Saw him at the bus stop. Cold again. Should I buy him gloves? She's doing her best. I was never strong enough to forgive her. One day, maybe he'll forgive me. By the end, Elias wasn't angry. He was broken open. Because now he saw the truth. Thomas hadn't been perfect, or even particularly brave. He had been human. Terrified. Flawed. But trying. Trying to be present in the only way he knew how. Elias closed the notebook and held it to his chest like it was a part of him. For the first time, he didn't feel abandoned. He felt chosen. The next morning, he took the book to his mother. She read it in silence. Every page. Then she looked at him and said, I hated him for so long. But maybe he grew up when we weren't looking. He tried, Elias said. She nodded. And now you get to do better. The words landed deep. He didn't want to be Thomas. But he wanted to honor the man Thomas tried to become. The week ended not with closure, but with clarity. Elias stood once again at the steps of the community center. The roof repair was scheduled. Books were arriving. A new youth mentorship program was already being drafted. And in his pocket was the notebook. A reminder that even the most broken legacies can become something whole, if someone's brave enough to carry them forward. Not perfectly, but honestly. The notebook stayed by Elias's bedside, its presence both comforting and weighty, like an unfinished conversation. Some nights he would read random entries, not searching for answers, but just to feel close to the man he'd never had the chance to truly meet. There was no big announcement. No viral story. No community celebration. That wasn't the way Thomas lived, and it wasn't the way Elias wanted to either. But the changes began to grow, quiet and steady, like roots under concrete. He used part of the money to fund a scholarship, not in Thomas's name, but in his mother's. The Rosa Moreno Scholarship Fund for working students who couldn't afford textbooks or meals. When he told her, she didn't cry. She just looked at him like she was seeing someone brand new, and someone she recognized, all at once. The roof at the community center was repaired. Kids came back in droves. Ms. Turner handed him a folder of thank you letters and told him to read them when he needed to remember why he chose to stay. He kept volunteering. Quietly. Consistently. Sweeping, stocking, mentoring. He was no longer the story, just a part of the place. And it felt right. He started carrying a sketchbook again. The kind he'd abandoned years ago because life had made art feel like a luxury. Now, he found himself drawing after midnight. Faces, places, moments. It helped him breathe. One of the last drawings he finished was of Thomas, not from memory, but from imagination. A man with kind eyes, standing in the corner of a room, watching someone smaller step forward into the light. It was more than a portrait. It was closure. But not all stories end with answers. Some end with decisions. And Elias had one left to make. Caldwell called again, almost a month after the will was executed. "There's one more property," he said. It wasn't in the main file. A cabin. In the hills. Isolated. Thomas used it occasionally, mostly to think. "It's yours now." Elias almost declined. But something stopped him. A few days later, he took a borrowed car and drove out alone. The road twisted past small towns and empty stretches of highway. The further he went, the quieter everything became. The cabin sat at the end of a gravel path, hidden behind a cluster of trees. It was small, nothing extravagant, but clean, intact, cared for. The door creaked when he stepped in. It smelled like old wood and pine and the kind of silence that only exists where memory lingers. There was a desk, a single bed, a small bookshelf, and one letter, sitting on the table with his name on it. His first name, this time. Elias. If you made it here, then you've already chosen the harder path. You didn't run. You didn't take the easy exit. You stayed. You saw the mess. You picked it up. I watched you your whole life, not because I was noble, but because I was afraid. I didn't know how to be a father. I still don't. But I hoped that maybe, if I left enough behind, you'd know I was trying. Maybe you hate me. That's fair. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a day. This place is yours now. For whenever the noise gets too loud. For when you need to remember who you are. Not who the world thinks you should be. Keep building. Keep giving. Keep seeing. And forgive yourself faster than I ever did. T. Elias read the letter 3 times before folding it and placing it back on the desk. He didn't cry. He just sat on the edge of the bed, let the silence hold him, and exhaled. When he returned to the city 2 days later, something in him had settled. Not peace, that would take years, maybe a lifetime. But clarity. He no longer walked like someone waiting for permission to exist. He walked like someone who knew exactly what it meant to be seen, and who he wanted to become because of it. One afternoon, at the community center, a boy about 10 years old came up to him, holding a broken pair of headphones. "Can you fix this?" the boy asked. Elias looked at the wires, at the damage. It was small. Not impossible. "Yeah," he said. "I can try." And the boy nodded and sat beside him like it was the most normal thing in the world, to trust someone you barely knew with something that mattered. That moment stayed with him. Because that was what Thomas had done, in his own imperfect way. And now, Elias was doing the same. Not with money. Not with answers. But with presence. With effort. With the quiet courage to show up. Again and again. If you liked this story, subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.